Hello and welcome back to the McLaren 720S. Now normally when I'm in a supercar and I'm introducing it, in the first few seconds of the video I'm normally tear-arsing around at maximum speed, heavy braking, downshifting through the gears. But today I want to talk about really living with, genuinely spending day-to-day time with a supercar. Now let me just begin by saying we are living in crazy times. So I've just been refreshing the stats of this car, just flushing it through my brain, and actually I've sort of taken a step back and reprocessed it somewhat. So I have actually been dailying this car, certainly at least when I've been in England. But having a look at the numbers, and why I say we're living in crazy times, is that we forget the context of what we're driving. So we say McLaren 720S like it's just a number. 720 is a model number. Well, that actually stands for something. That stands for 720 PS, which in horsepower terms is around about 710 horsepower. 710 horsepower. It's got 568 pounds-feet of torque. So when we sort of just say 720S, kind of blasé, that is a figure of context. That is something that says you're in something serious. Now, just to further apply context to that figure, before this car joined the channel as a long-termer, my daily driver was a GT3, and I know that sounds crazy, but once again, we're living in pretty crazy times. That car is 500 horsepower. When you drive that car, when you drive the GT3, the last thing you think is, do you know what, this car needs some more power. That's the last thing you think. And yet, right here, I'm sat in something with another 210 horsepower. That's like, just, throw another hot hatch in there. It's bonkers stuff. So I just want to set some context as to the engineering marvel that is the 720. We're driving something that, from my experience, upon planting my right foot hard against that throttle, things distort. The world around you sort of blurs into this tunnel vision. Your diaphragm gets pressed against the seat, and you genuinely do brace yourself for the attack of momentum that is unleashed upon the torque and the power of this thing exploding you down the road. However, talking about it being a daily driver, right now I'm following a truck. We're doing 27 miles an hour down a wonderful country lane. The sun is shining through this goldfish bowl-like canopy of a cockpit. I say goldfish bowl because the visibility is incredible. And I'm driving it, dare I say it, like a Golf. That's the benchmark, isn't it? A Golf. I don't know why everyone says that, but it seems to be a thing. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? We have the engineering marvel to be able to control 710 horsepower, and this isn't factually proven, but I'm convinced that 710 horsepower is at the wheels, because the way this thing propels you across tarmac is unbelievable. I did a drag race last year in my 675LT against a Porsche 918 Spyder, classified as a hypercar, not a supercar. It's the next step up. And up to 100 miles an hour, those two cars were nose to nose. And then after 100 miles an hour, up to 120, 30, 40, 50 plus, 918 vanished. And I thought to myself, that's where your other £500,000 goes. Beyond 100 miles an hour, it just vanished into the horizon. I haven't tried it yet, but feeling and being familiar with the power in a 675LT, and now being familiar with the power in a 720S, I honestly think that this thing would give a 918 Spyder a good run for its money. And we're talking about what was Porsche's flagship hypercar just a few years ago. And yet here we are in relative comfort. I've got a great sound system. I've got my 5-finger death punch plugged in via my Bluetooth from my phone, and it's in automatic, and it's just casually going up and down the gears like this was a pure daily driver. So that's the engineering appreciation out of the way for context. Let's talk about what it's been like. Well, I've had the car for about 2 months. Granted, I haven't been around for a solid 2 months in order to spend time with it. But every time I'm home, and every time I just want to hop in a car and go about my day, purely outside of filming, I've been living with the McLaren 720S, living with a 710 horsepower supercar. Practicality-wise, look, I don't actually class myself as a journalist, so I rarely do a by convention review of a car. What I like to do is take you along for the drive and explain what it's like, immerse you in the experience of driving these cars. but I feel an obligation to tell you what it's like to live with something like this. On the outset, you would think impractical, inefficient, loud, uncomfortable. There's just no way you could use it every single day. Categorically, you can, without a shadow of a doubt. The space that this car has now as well. So this is running, don't forget, a full carbon tubbed architecture. It's running mono cage 2, McLaren's latest carbon tubbed setup in their Super Series cars. There is mono cage 3, which is in the Senna, but right now let's focus on 720. What it's opened up is this huge area in the rear here, which, if you don't have any bags in it, opens up massive visibility. And if you do, there's bag straps there to genuinely tie down your bags and take a lot of stuff around. Now, I've had the few occasions where I've either been on a shop or I've been on a road trip. I've just generally had lots of stuff with me. The boot in the front is big. Like, I would say 90% of the trips I do, even together with my wife, we've been able to do everything with just the front boot alone. But if there is any excess stuff, we've been piling it in this space here. It looks at first like it's practical, and it is in terms of the space being offered, but what can be quite annoying, if whatever you've got isn't able to be fitted down underneath those straps, it's forever sliding around it in the back. And heaven forbid, if you anchor on after you've been using all 710 horsepower, that air brake comes up and you reduce momentum like you've hit a brick wall, whatever's in the back quickly becomes in the front. so that really is a sort of secondary measure for carrying stuff. However, it is there. Now, I don't talk about efficiency when it comes to supercars. Let's face it, if you're buying a supercar, the last thing you're thinking about is how efficient this thing is. However, what I have been doing a lot with in this car is motorway miles. I've been going up and down to MBN London, and it cruises incredibly well. I would say that there is quite a bit of road noise. Now, that's in part down to the tyres, but also because there's something about the way that a carbon tub resonates, is that it just generally lets in a little bit more road noise. It just vibrates from the tyres through the tub, and the ambience, as I'm sure you can even hear now, we're going pretty steady, and there is this, I would say, above average road noise that comes through the cabin. Now, when you've got your music on and you're blaring along and you're in your driver focus mind, you don't mind so much. It's actually, funnily enough, when I start filming like this and I'm aware of it when I'm in the edit, and I'm like, oh wow, actually the ambient road noise is quite loud. Particularly when you have a passenger, you do start feeling like you're talking a little bit louder than you might expect. Having said that, because the car's got so much torque and it's so light, once you get this thing rolling and you're in 7th gear, it's actually incredibly efficient. Now, I don't have a very accurate way of giving you my average miles per gallon, because as soon as I get off the motorway, I'm driving this in a manner that, let's say, makes this thing drink with 2 straws. So the average miles per gallon for me is kind of like 22. So listen, it's not great. You got to remember the platform we're in. We're in a 4-litre twin turbocharged flat plane crank V8 that, as I mentioned, propels you down the road with some kind of space technology. So really, as a combined figure, 22 is not all that bad. But when you're on a run, I find it perfectly acceptable. And I think that's most in part between big torque and lightweight. Winning formula always. Now, I actually want to talk about value. So, from factory, if you were to spec one of these, like well spec, like pretty much how you'd want it, forget the MSO stuff. MSO, for those of you guys who don't know, is the options list beyond the options list. It's basically if you want to create something bespoke for your car, a custom colour, some carbon in places that it isn't, some pinstriping or fancy Alcantara or something like that, it goes to McLaren's MSO division, which is McLaren Special Operations. But if you were to just use the options list, you could get a very nicely spec'd one of these cars for like 230 to 250,000 pounds. Listen, I'm not throwing that number around lightly. That is vast coin. I appreciate that. I mean, considering what you're getting, I just mentioned earlier, this is 918 Spider performance. Listen, I don't care what anyone's saying, you're getting that kind of acceleration for 230 grand. 250 grand if you're gonna go big time on the options. You can drive it every single day. It's more practical, I think it looks incredible. This is the kind of car that has grown on me so much. I think we'll all agree that when the car launched and it was announced, the controversy that surrounded the aesthetics of the car was rife throughout the internet. The more I see them, the more I fall in love with them. The aerodynamic sculpture of these is something to behold, particularly in the right paint job. I found that the ones with a heavy metallic fleck in them really shows up those contours. This is in a colour called Fistral Blue, which from the outset looks kind of similar to Porsche Miami Blue. The difference is that in the sunshine there is actually metallic flecks in the paint, and it really pops and really helps to show off the contours of the car. What is going to happen one day is that they're going to make a Spider version of this car, and then we've got the inevitable LT version. Now listen, when I drive this car, the last thing I think is this needs to be any faster, any lighter, any more hardcore. It is phenomenal. But the prospect of them doing so, the prospect of them applying LT DNA to this car excites me greatly. And I'm pretty confident that I will be in the queue for one of those cars when it launches. As a complete package, it's still going to offer everything that I've just spoken about, but it's going to have more emotion. I remember on my 675 LT, when you upshifted around about 7,000 RPM, it used to have this whip crack bang, which just engineered in so much more emotion into the car. And that brings me on to the way this car makes you feel. Sometimes you look down at the speedo and you're like, how did I arrive here? The numbers boggle the mind because the momentum you have gained with such little effort makes you wondering how you arrived there. What I like out of a supercar is I like to step out of it and think, yeah, I've just been for a drive. Like, I have driven that thing. Sometimes in this, it propels you with such little effort that you can't help but feel that it is sometimes a little bit unengaging. That is until you really start to push on and grab it by the scruff of its neck. This thing seems to find its own plane and rewards you for going swift. When I say swift, I'm sure you can imagine the kind of numbers I'm talking about that we shan't mention on camera. But when you do get it up there, when you do get it into what I would call its operating realm, it becomes a new car. The way this thing gives you feedback at proper speed, the way that the brakes on this act like they shed off speed. Honestly, it's like there's an anchor attached to the back of the car and you've just thrown it into the tarmac and just boom, just absolutely anchors on. And to think that there's going to be an evolution of this car that's even lighter, even faster, brakes better, handles with more agility, makes me scratch my head. Every car that I get into from McLaren, and I've stopped saying it because it sounds like a broken record, but I am like, where next? Like, where do we go from here? And I think that every time I get in a car. The 600 LT, which is the top of their sports series cars, is now faster than the 675 LT just a couple of years ago. And that was their like flagship Super Series car. The rate of development and evolution from this brand is mind-boggling, and that's one of the things that I admire about McLaren the most. A lot of their time, they push boundaries further than anyone else in the supercar segment. I think they've really made the rest of the industry stand to attention because beforehand, no one was making cars like this. I mean, we've got a full carbon-tubbed supercar that is the same performance as hypercars. It's just bonkers, and you can use it every single day. They're so far ahead. I mean, no one's doing styling as radical as McLaren right now. But after they've settled into the world for a couple of years, that's when they start becoming appreciated and they start to fit in and become beautiful. And I've noticed that this thing gets so many looks. You park it up, people just kind of gather around it and take photographs. It's really cool to see people appreciating it, and it's also really cool that it's made in England. I really like that. I forget that lots of the cars that I'm driving, the Ferraris, the Porsches, you know, I can't drive a short distance down the road and go and visit their factory. These guys are based in Woking. It's really nice to have that connection with the brand. But finally, I would like to conclude by drawing parallels between cameras and cars. You ask a photographer what the best camera is, and they'll say it's the one you use the most. I think the same is applied to cars. Now hear me out. I plan on driving this car throughout the whole year, and importantly, through winter, which, if you spend any time in England during winters, you'll know it's horrific. So when I get back from Dubai, I'm having winter tyres fitted to the 720S, and I'm going to use this car throughout the year. I'm going to do my Christmas shopping in it. I'm going to be visiting friends and family. I'm going to be using it like you would do any other car. And that's the #1 trick of the McLaren 720S. You can use it. You can use it for everything. Business, pleasure, track days, road trips, and everything in between. 710 horsepower. It looks like this. It goes like a crazed mosquito on smack. It's just intense acceleration, and then you can slow back down, put it into automatic, and it takes care of the gears for you. And on that note, as always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in Dubai. Ciao.